Right, so this is going to be a story of how I tried and failed to become a truck driver. It's an amusing little story and a general life update just to explain one man's foiled attempt at climbing up on the social hierarchy and getting a better position and a better job and better money for himself. So how did this all come about? Well, I had no initial interest in learning to drive anything or learning to drive a truck until I first got my driving license at the age of 29. This was in October of 2023. Honestly, learning to drive and getting my license, it was a really transformative experience, and it changed my outlook in a lot of ways. I feel like I was a bit of a different person before I got my license. I honestly never thought that I would get it in the first place because it was just so goddamn hard. A lot of people tend to think of driving in and of itself as a relatively easy skill that more or less anyone can acquire. And for all practical intents and purposes, you need to have a car if you're to get anywhere in this day and age, because public transport just isn't any good. It can get you some places, but it's not practical. It's limited in terms of its hours of operation, and it's ridiculously expensive. And it's not nearly as fully integrated like with, say, Japan's public transportation system. Now, you need a car if you're to get anywhere, and there's just so many practical advantages to being able to drive. And I spent my entire 20s trying to learn to drive, saving up for lessons, failing, and then taking more lessons. Having my lessons with the instructors for me was the hardest part because it's so stressful. There's so many things you need to do, so many ridiculous rules that you have to be mindful of, like you're not allowed to park near a bend. You're not allowed to do this. You always have to look around in your side mirrors like a every time you're doing maneuvers. Oh no, you have to do this. You have to do this peripheral check. Like, And if the examiner doesn't see you do that, they fail you. They drill this into your head. And I'm not even convinced that this makes you a better driver, because nobody I know really does it. Really, all you should need to do is check your side mirrors and your rear view mirror. But honestly, even a rear view mirror should be optional. Currently, I drive a minivan at my place of work, and none of the minivans, because they're all goods vehicles, none of them have a rear view mirror. Because as you can see, there's a partition blocking the cab of the van with the storage trunk where you load goods inside. Anyway, I feel like, especially in this country, learning to drive is so much more painful and ridiculous than it needs to be. But generations ago, it was pretty much a given that as soon as you turned 18 or 19, you'd have a few lessons, take the test. The test would be relatively straightforward. Basically, there was none of this theory test, then practical test. It was all just one test back then. You'd take the test, and you'd pass, and then you'd be a road user, a motorist. And you'd have access to the road, all the jobs that were available exclusively to those who were able to drive, and those that were in faraway places which you could only get to realistically by use of a car. So there was very much a before and after in terms of me getting my license, because before I got my license, I was incredibly dejected, hopeless, and pathetic. I thought I would never get it. I thought for the rest of my life I'd be dependent entirely on my mum and dad for lifts, and my older sister and my relatives. I'd be carpooling. The media, they try to promote this. They try to promote the idea of being carless. They try to promote using a bicycle and using public transport, but it's rubbish. You need a car. using a bike, it can be fun if you're doing it recreationally, but if you need to go about from place to place, or if you need to do shopping for groceries, things like that, it's just simply, there's no comparison. No, you need a car. The media tries to gaslight you if you don't have a car by telling you that you're doing your bit to help the environment. But it's simply not feasible to go about your daily business, to get the things you need, and just to go the places where you want to if you don't have a car. What I'm saying is basically the benefits that come with learning to drive and having a car vastly outweigh the odds, vastly outweigh the negatives. The pros vastly outweigh the cons. That's what I'm saying. So bearing that in mind, when I finally came out and passed on my third attempt, mind, I felt like things in my life were beginning to change. And shortly after this time, I got a job working for and it was especially convenient because my dad used to work for and he knew the general manager at the branch in so I already had a foot in the door, luckily. And it's thanks to him that I was able to get an entrance in it working for and I basically got the job there, and I've been working here ever since. I started work here back in December 2023. I never thought I'd see myself working a role as a postman driving a delivery van, but I've been doing this for the past year and a half, and I feel like suddenly, now this job isn't perfect. I talked about this in my video where I discussed my job as a postman. It's not the best job ever, but it's certainly miles better than any of the jobs I've had up until this point, because you get to be sat down for the majority of it. The shifts are relatively short. There's a set list of somewhat repetitive, easy to learn tasks, and once you've done everything you need to, that's it. You wrap up and finish and clock out for the day. And the pay is good. It's slightly above minimum wage. And then of course there's the matter with overtime. So I really felt like I was onto a winner with this job. And the more time I spent working at this job, being a van driver and a collection officer, that's my official job title, the more time I spent doing this job, the more my confidence and the more my pride in myself as a driver began to build up over time. And it got to the point where I began to notice there's a whole fleet of articulated lorries and that's not what they're called, rigids. That's right, yeah. The difference between an articulated lorry and a rigid, for those of you who don't know, is that a rigid is a truck where the cab and the body of the truck, where all the storage goes in, they're both affixed to the same vehicle. Whereas for an articulated lorry, there's a cab and then there's a massive trailer that's attached to it. The articulated lorry is the largest of all the vehicle classifications. You need a C+E license in this country in order to be able to drive one of those. So with my eyes on the prize, I looked at this fleet of lorries and I thought, you know what, maybe I should look into seeing if I could go about driving one of those. I did a bit of research and I found out that truck drivers, whatever you may think of them, you might think of it as a lowly blue-collar profession, but the pay is fairly decent. It's much more than what I make currently. I think it averages, depending on where you live. If you live in, for instance, a highly built-up, heavily populated area like London, you earn somewhere around £18 per hour. Whereas in other cases, it's somewhere closer to £15. It varies depending on where you live, but the pay is certainly better compared to what I earn currently. And the shifts can be very long. The shifts are often long because you're going to be hauling goods across long distances. I don't think my company offers any distances that are longer than going from, say, Leeds to not Leeds. What's the farthest distance in this country? I think maybe Newcastle, maybe even Scotland to London or anywhere like that. But there's even positions where you can go even further than just one end of the country to another. There's even these jobs, these truck driving jobs, where you get to be what's called a tramper. And basically, it's when you drive not just from one end of the country to another, but you go across different countries, across continents. Like you might be driving goods from, say, London or Portsmouth and end up in Geneva, Switzerland, or Germany. I've spoken to people who have done that before. They say it's physically exhausting, but the pay is bloody good. So we're dealing with an occupation here that gives you good money, you're financially very well compensated, you spend long stretches of time on the road, nobody else is there in the cab to bother you, which is totally fine by me, by the way, because I've never really been that much of a people person. You also get paid extra money for lunch breaks. You get an extra food allowance, which is even better in my case, because I love food. I love stopping off at a service station, treating myself to a coffee or whatever food there is back there. That's my idea of a good time. You get to be sat down in, more likely than not, a vehicle cab that's cool and well conditioned, well air conditioned and well ventilated. You spend long stretches of your time on open track road or on motorways, so it doesn't involve a lot of tricky navigating or maneuvering, although there will be plenty of that. So learning to drive a truck certainly ain't easy, as I found out later, but I'll get into that later. It sounds like the perfect kind of job that I could have seen myself doing. And at the time when this occurred to me, this was in I think this would have been a year ago exactly. So I think spring or early summer of 2024. And around this time, I wasn't doing so well in my exams. Yes, I don't know if I made this clear, but I'm currently studying a master's degree in building surveying. There's a long story behind that. Maybe I should get into that for a different video. But I've been training this entire time to become a building surveyor because it's what my dad used to do. And the whole idea was, my whole master plan was, I would get my qualification, I'd get my master's degree, then I'd work as a sort of junior apprentice under my dad as a surveyor. He would show me the ropes and the tools of the trade, the tricks of the trade, how to do a proper building survey. I'd build up skills and accumulate knowledge and experience, and then I'd be a professional building surveyor. However, my dad was severely ill in health at the time. This was only a few months before we eventually lost him, which was in July of 2024, last year. So it wasn't certain that my whole plan of being a surveyor was going to take off. Because if I lost my dad, then, well, I'd have to work even harder to get a foot in the door for the surveying industry. So I needed a backup plan, and being a truck driver seemed like one hell of a backup plan. It was something that occurred to me entirely out of the ether. I never even would have so much as considered it a year before. But by this time, here I was. Before I knew it, I was talking to my boss about this brilliant idea that I'd had, that almost came to me in a dream, a series of revelatory experiences. And he encouraged me to actually go about and purchase a truck driving course, and that there were numerous registered truck driving schools in and around the county of Surrey, which is where I currently live. So, using my credit card, I spent around 3,000, possibly more, something like £3,400. It might be more or less. I'll annotate in the video if I made any mistakes. And I went forward with the fire of hope and optimism in my heart. And part of me actually felt the entire time that I actually wanted this to work and take off more so than I did the surveying industry, because this was a career avenue that had come to me entirely upon a whim, but it was my idea from the beginning, and my parents had never talked me into it. No one at my place of work had encouraged me. Loads of people had discouraged me and told me, oh, you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to spend a bit more time on the road before you do that. But I was absolutely 100% confident that I could nail it. All I needed to do, so I felt, was I just need to work hard, understand the rules of the road. It's like a video game, so I convinced myself. The more time I spend learning to drive, the more time I spend in the car, in the cab, learning how to drive the truck and so on, the better I will get, and it's only inevitable that at some point I will become a fully qualified truck driver. So from that point on, I finished the online theory test. The theory test, it's not difficult, but it is incredibly boring. You're presented with a lot of questions. You have to memorize the answers. But anyway, I sorted that out before long. By July, we lost my dad, and it just seemed like all the markers of fate were pointing in this one direction. This had all been happening for a reason. I was destined to get this license, this C+E license. I would finally unlock my true inner potential as a truck driver, and from there, everything would fall into place like dominoes. So that's what happened. And it would not be until I first started taking my actual truck driving lessons in a truck cab with the company that I was with, GS Driver Training. It was not until then that I would begin to learn just what it was like to actually drive a truck. Now, in my honest opinion, driving a truck is not impossible. It's not too different to driving a normal car, but it does come with its challenges. And you are being held to a very, very lofty standard, more so than you are with a normal car. If you thought learning to drive a car was difficult enough, oh boy do I have news for you. Wait till you sit in the cab of a truck. So the differences that come with driving a large truck compared with a car is that you're driving a vehicle that is much wider. So you will have narrower space when driving along a road. More often than not, you will find that your positioning will have to be even more accurate than you are with driving a normal car. You have more blind spots, so that means more mirror checks. You have to be careful that you're not driving too close to the curb in an urban area, because the side mirrors, which project outward on either directions, they can actually hit pedestrians if you drive too close by them, and they can injure people because they're made of metal. So that's a thing you've got to watch out for. Overtaking cars like cyclists, that's incredibly difficult. You have to give them as much room as you would a normal car. It's easy enough to do it in a normal car, but try doing it in a ginormous, gargantuan 7.5 ton or 17.5 ton truck. It's much easier said than done. And add to that all the issues, all the challenges that I thought I overcame with driving a normal car, being forced to take in lots of information at once in a short time. Some people are naturally good at this. Some people have a militaristic stoicism about them, where even though there's lots of things going on, they can calmly sit down, process the instructions they're given, and do what's asked of them. And it just comes naturally. With me, however, I've just never been like that. I've always been what I call a third time lucky person. Sometimes I need to fail twice in order to succeed the third time. I passed my normal driver's test on my third attempt. However, the more time I've spent learning to drive a truck, the more I've begun to realize, at least in my case, I used to think it was like playing a video game. The more hours you spend, the better a player you become. Except in my case, I feel like I'm not making the amount of progress that I expected I would. The first time I took my test, on my very first attempt, I didn't end up taking the test because I simply wasn't ready. My instructor told me, no, you're simply not there yet. And I got well over the minimum required number of serious faults, which is 1. Yeah, for those of you who aren't aware, in any driving test, you're allowed to get up to 12 minor faults in order to pass. However, a serious fault, like for instance, turning without checking your mirrors, brake checking, or doing something dangerous, or going over the speed limit, you only need 1 of those in order to fail your test. The second time I did my test, or the first time I actually properly did my test, I scored 2 serious faults, and I forget how many minor ones. No, actually, no, that's not correct. It was 3 serious faults that I scored. And stupidly, they never emailed me a copy of my test certificate. So I don't know how many minor faults I got, but I certainly didn't pass. So on my third attempt, or my second actual attempt at taking the test, if you want to be more technical, I thought I'd had this all in the bag, because it was technically my third attempt. But only this time, I got 2 serious faults, which is slightly better than last time, but 13 minors. In other words, 3 serious faults, if you technically include all of them. And honestly, I would have thought, no matter how bad, no matter how a driver you are, the more you do it, the better at it you'll become. But that just did not appear to be the case with me. For whatever reason, my preferred method of instruction and learning means that I struggle with taking on board lots of instructions in a short time, remembering all these silly little details that you'll be expected to know if you want to be a qualified truck driver. And it's not guaranteed, it's not a given, at least in my case, that I will succeed if I take the test again. It's not even guaranteed that I might do better than last time. And by the way, none of this would be an issue. I'd certainly be willing, I'd be chomping at the bit to try one more time, were it not for the cost. Because it's not cheap trying to learn how to drive a truck. It is the opposite of cheap. It feels like the way our economy, the way this country's organized, every facet of modern life is designed to keep you where you are. There's very few avenues for career growth and getting a better position. See, my company, they used to offer apprenticeships, they used to offer training to their own staff, and they used to pay for it out of their own pocket, invest in their own staff in a way that would help them learn to drive larger vehicles. But they simply don't do those anymore. Well, they don't do them as often. There was incidentally one apprenticeship that was being offered, but I couldn't take it for reasons I'll get into another video. But my family and I are going to be moving house soon, and the apprenticeship takes place over the course of 2 years. So I would need to stay in the same location for 2 years for me to be able to take that. But speaking of cost, just how much does it cost to learn to drive a truck? Well, I had to pay 3,500 quid just to get the package deal truck driving course, which I got with the certified truck driving school. That set me back £3,500. But if you don't pass, if you don't succeed the first time, then you have to book more tests and more training. And the test itself, retaking the test alone, costs around £400, which isn't exactly peanuts. But then having actual one-on-one instruction and tuition in a cab, that is £75. Is it £75, or I think it might be £90? It's somewhere around that, around £80 or £90 per hour. And I have had, I think, in total, somewhere between 40 and 50 hours worth of training. So how much would that be? I might need to think about and tally that up. What's 50 times 90? I think that's around £4,000. 4,000 to 4,500. It's a lot of money, and I simply don't have that kind of money. I would need to save up many months, over the course of many months, in order to give it another go. And if I were making visible signs of progress, I'd certainly be willing to give it another bash, at least to see if my prophecy of third time's the charm would do it. But then I also think back on all the other things I could have spent that money on. For instance, I could have stashed it all in my cash ISA, and I could let it sit there and collect money over time. Of course, I can't really do anything with that money. I think it's fair to say, if you spend all that money, particularly on an avenue which you're convinced will pay off dividends in the long term, but it doesn't do that, well, intentions and whatever be damned, you've basically wasted that money. Am I prepared to waste more of that money? Not at the moment. I'm not. When you pass your theory test, this is true, I think, with learning to drive a normal car, there's a 2-year window of opportunity you have to take the test again without needing to retake the theory test. That's how long your theory test remains valid for. But when my theory test expires, which I think it will in 2026, I'll have to redo that again, which means I'll have to spend more of my time and more of my money relearning all the same crap that I did the first time. Anyway, what's the moral of the story here? I don't think you should give up on your dreams. I chased them. I think I gave them a bloody good chase. I was pretty stubborn and persistent. I ignored the protests of the people who told me I couldn't do it. I was determined to prove them wrong. I thought I had a future in the transportation industry. I thought I could easily see myself being a truck driver. But thousands of pounds worth of sunk costs and many hours spent trying to learn and navigate the rules of the road in an HGV vehicle later, can I look back and say that it was worth it? It's hard for me to say, but I feel like I've learned sometimes life punishes you for wanting things that you're not capable of getting, or it knocks you down for trying too hard. You will be presented with a choice at times of trying again, seeing if you can get it right that next time. But how certain am I that if I try it a third time, the same thing won't happen again, and by that point, I'll have set myself back another few £1,000s. I'll be in another precarious financial position. So it's like, what's the point? Do I really want to risk that happening again? Will it be worth it? I don't know. But I don't plan on learning to drive a truck again anytime soon. At least not until I've had more time to think about it. I'm certainly not materially wealthy enough to give it another try, not in this case. And I'm thinking a better use of my money would be stashing it in my cash ISA with Trading 212. Because the great thing about that is, over time, that thing will get me money just by sitting in there. And imagine what I could do with it. Imagine with all the money that could have gotten me if I'd put it in there instead of learning to drive a truck. I don't know if I regret it though, that's the thing. Because sometimes this is how you grow as a person. You ambition for for roles, for jobs that would give you a pay increase and better social status and all that. And if you try and you're successful, then hurrah for you. But if you try and fail, I think it teaches you more about your limitations, what you're capable of and what's realistic and what isn't. And I feel like currently, as I record this video log, that is what learning to drive a truck has done for me. Anyway, that is it. That's the story of how I tried and failed to become a truck driver. I hope you enjoyed that video. Gotta do my collection now, but I'll see you guys later. This has been Tracking. Take care, everyone.